As far as the endocrine system goes, endocrine system, it works hand in hand with our nervous system. Nervous system, it works much, much, much faster. So typically, it takes milliseconds for a signal to go from the CNS to the target tissue, the target cells. And again, in terms of duration, also that could be within milliseconds or seconds. When you compare that to the endocrine system and the components that it uses, being chemical messengers, primarily, again, hormones, that is not as quickly. So it could take seconds to days for, seconds to hours, for example, for the signals to take effect. And as far as it shutting off for the hormones to stop doing whatever effect that they have, that could also be anywhere from seconds to hours, minutes to days. Whereas, again, when you look at the nervous tissue, typically, again, seconds. So again, you can turn it on, turn it off very quickly. Along with that, when you talk about the endocrine system, it's, again, as I said, it consists of chemical messengers. So again, it's a chemical composition. It regulates the chemical composition and volume of our interstitial fluid. So again, this is what we have within our internal environment. It's responsible to regulate metabolism and also energy balance. It has effects on the contraction of both smooth as well as heart muscle, cardiac muscle fibers. It could also regulate the secretion from other glandular tissue. It also controls our growth and development. Along with that, it also regulates the operation of our reproductive system. And the other thing is, it helps establish our circadian rhythms. So, for example, our sleep-wake cycle. So all these are responsible are the responsibilities of the endocrine system. So what are some of the locations of a lot of these tissue, these glands that do that? So over here, you can see that we have the thyroid gland, and posterior to the thyroid gland, we have these 4 tiny pea-sized glands, which are called the parathyroid glands. So thyroid glands, parathyroid glands. In addition to that, when you go into our brain has the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, as well as the pineal gland, all which also produce, which are part of the endocrine system, which produce chemical messengers. And again, these chemical messengers is what we call the hormones. Our thyroid gland, we have our thymus gland as well. Our heart also produces, stomach produces certain hormones. We have our adrenal glands, which also produce hormones, even our kidneys. And then when you go down to the reproductive system, we have the testes and the ovaries in the uterus in women, which are also producing hormones. All right, so any given hormone will move or travel throughout our entire body. So again, because of that, it's systemic. Hormones travel systemically. And again, they do this in order to get to the cells that they're only able to affect. So hormones are very specific to the cells that they are able to control. And those cells that are affected by a specific hormone are called target cells. So specific cells which are sensitive to specific hormones are called target cells. So hormones, again, just like neurotransmitters, they influence their target cells by binding to them chemically to specific protein receptors on that cell. Now, only the target cell for a specific hormone has receptors. Again, these are the hormone receptors that are able to bind and recognize that specific hormone. So to give an example, there's a hormone called TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. And thyroid stimulating hormone binds to receptors on the cells of the thyroid gland. However, it's not going to be able to bind to cells of the kidneys, for example, or the ovaries. Why? Because the kidneys and the ovaries, they don't have cells that have receptors to thyroid stimulating hormone. They're not sensitive to that. So receptors, like other cellular proteins, they're constantly being synthesized and broken down. So generally speaking, a target cell has anywhere between a couple thousand all the way to perhaps over 100,000 receptors for a specific hormone. And so when a hormone is present in very high quantities or extra or excess, the number of target cell receptors, they could start to decrease. So when that happens, we say that it's down-regulating. And again, it's doing that to kind of protect itself so it doesn't have to work as hard. And again, if it starts working too hard and again, that effect alters that cell overtly, then that could have negative consequences. So due to that, the cell will down-regulate. And again, by a process called down-regulation. So essentially, again, what down-regulation will do is it decreases the responsiveness of target cells to that specific hormone. Now, the opposite also could happen. So when a hormone, or for example, for that matter, a neurotransmitter, it's not sufficient in quantity. When there's a deficiency of it, the target tissue, it will start increasing the number of receptors, and we call that upregulation. Okay, so upregulation. So we have downregulation, and there's upregulation. So let's move on to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. For a very long time, for many years, the pituitary gland, another name for the pituitary gland is the hypophysis. Okay? Hypophysis, H-Y-P-O, hypo, P-H-Y-S-I-S, hypophysis. It used to be termed the master gland. Okay. Why was it called the master gland? Because they believe that it secreted many hormones that controlled other endocrine glands. Well, now we know that that's not really true. The pituitary gland, it has its own master, actually, all right? And that's the hypothalamus. And again, hypothalamus is the region that's superior to the pituitary gland. So hypothalamus is part of your brain. You should know this by now from the previous lectures that we had. Moving back down, so this small region of the brain, again, which is inferior to the thalamus. Hypo means below, so hypothalamus, below the thalamus. This is a major integrating link between the nervous and the endocrine systems. It ends up getting its input from many other areas of the brain, including the limbic system, the cerebral cortex, the thalamus, and the reticular activating system, okay? RAS, reticular activating system. It also receives sensory signals from internal organs and from the retina. Now, the pituitary gland, it's very small in size. It's about 1 to 1.5 centimeters, or about a half an inch. It's the size of a pea. The shape is pea. It's like a pea-shaped structure, Bisalia. And the pituitary gland, it's sitting within the hypophyseal fossa of the sphenoid bone. Specifically, that's marked by the sella turcica. Again, if you go back, I had told you about this when we were reviewing the bones. So sella turcica, this is specifically what ends up nestling and creating that hypophyseal fossa. And again, that's part of the sphenoid bone. So the pituitary gland gets attached to the hypothalamus by a little connector, and that connector we call the infundibulum. Okay, the infundibulum is what, or this stalk is what connects the pituitary gland to the hypothalamus. Now, the pituitary gland has two anatomically and functionally separate parts to it. There's the anterior part, or we call that the anterior pituitary gland, and the posterior pituitary gland. The larger of the two is the anterior lobe, the anterior pituitary gland. And that accounts for roughly 75% of the mass of the entire gland. And again, anterior pituitary gland, this is made up of epithelial tissue. Now, the anterior pituitary, it is actually made up of two parts as well in adults. There's the pars distalis. This is a larger bulbar portion, and then there's the pars tuberalis. Okay, so the pars distalis and pars tuberalis. So these are the two parts to it, to the anterior pituitary gland. Now, and remember, it is epithelial tissue. The posterior pituitary gland, it's made up of nervous tissue, and like the anterior, it is also made up of two parts. Okay, so there's the pars nervosa, okay, and this is a larger bulbar portion of the posterior pituitary gland, and then of course, yeah. So the pars nervosa, and the other part is the infundibulum. Now, the posterior pituitary, it has axons and axon terminals of about 10,000 neurosecretory cells. And their cell bodies, we find them located in the supraoptic and the paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. Now, the axon terminals in the posterior pituitary gland, they're associated with specialized neuroglia that are called pituicytes. Okay, pituicytes, P-I-T-U-I-C-Y-T-E-S, pituicytes. And these cells have a supporting role that are similar to astrocytes. So if you don't know what astrocytes do, go back to chapter 16 and review that. Now, there's also another area that's called the pars intermedia. Okay, and this pars intermedia, now remember, we're talking about in adults, right? Now, the pars intermedia, it atrophies, okay, during fetal development, and it stops working as in adults. Now, with that said, some of the cells from the pars intermedia, they end up migrating into adjacent parts of the anterior pituitary. All right, so the anterior pituitary. All right, the anterior pituitary, again, it's also referred to as the adenohypophysis. The adenohypophysis, A-D-E-N-O, hypophysis, H-Y-P-O-P-H-Y-S-I-S. It secretes hormones that regulate a very wide range of bodily activities. They range from growth to reproduction. Release of the anterior pituitary hormones ends up being simulated by other hormones, and those other hormones are called releasing hormones. Okay, and they get stopped by or suppressed by other hormones, which are called inhibiting hormones. Okay, so again, there's releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones, and both of them end up being secreted from the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamic hormones that release or inhibit the anterior pituitary hormones, they end up getting to the anterior pituitary gland through a portal system. Now, if you remember back from chapter 14, blood, it usually goes from the heart through an artery to a capillary and then to a vein, and then eventually ends up going back to the heart. Now, in a portal system, blood flows from one capillary network into a portal vein, and then into a second capillary network before it ends up returning to the heart. So the name of the portal system gives the location of the secondary capillary network. So in the hypophyseal portal system, another term for the hypophyseal portal system is the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. Okay, hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. So in this hypophyseal portal system, blood, it flows from capillaries in the hypothalamus into the portal veins that carry blood to the capillaries of the anterior pituitary. Now, the superior hypophyseal arteries, branches of the internal carotid arteries, they bring blood into the hypothalamus. What else? All right. So now let's start looking at enough of the, I think that's enough information for testing information for that. Moving along, let's look at some of these hormones now specifically. So the very first hormone that we have over here is human growth hormone. Another term for human growth hormone is somatotropin. Okay, somatotropin. SOMATOTROPIN. Somatotropin gets secreted by cells that are called somatotrophs. Okay, SOMATOTROPHS, somatotrophs. Human growth hormone, in turn, stimulates several tissues to secrete insulin-like growth factors, IGFs, okay, insulin-like growth factors. And they stimulate general body growth, and also they regulate various aspects of metabolism. So this is very, very, very important, okay? So human growth hormone stimulates IGFs, okay, and IGFs, they stimulate a lot of the growth that takes place within our body, in addition to regulating many aspects of metabolism. The second one that we have listed is thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. Another term for thyroid stimulating hormone is thyrotropin. Thyrotropin controls the secretion and other activities of the thyroid gland. Okay? And thyrotropin, or thyroid stimulating hormone, gets secreted by cells called thyrotrophs. Okay? THYROTROPHS, thyrotrophs. The third thing that we have listed over here is FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone. In addition to that, another one that works with it, which is not listed here, is luteinizing hormone, LUTEINIZING, luteinizing hormone. So FSH and luteinizing hormone, or LH is the acronym for it. FSH and LH, they're secreted by cells called gonadotrophs. Okay? Gonadotrophs. So both LH and FSH, they act on our gonads. They stimulate the secretion of estrogen and progesterone, and the maturation of oocytes in ovaries. And oocytes are immature eggs, okay, that are found within females. And in addition, they also stimulate the secretion of testosterone and sperm production in the testes of males. So again, FSH and LH are both very important for reproductive health and our ability to reproduce. Now, the third one that's listed over here is prolactin. Prolactin initiates milk production in the mammary glands when a woman is pregnant. And it's released by cells called lactotrophs, okay, lactotrophs. Lastly, we have listed adrenocorticotrophic hormone, okay, or ACTH, adrenocorticotrophic hormone. Another term for it is corticotropin, okay, corticotropin. And corticotropin stimulates the adrenal cortex, okay, to secrete glucocorticoids. Okay? And it ends up being secreted by or synthesized by cells called corticotrophs. Okay, corticotrophs. Now, some corticotrophs also secrete MSH. Okay, M like Mary, S like Sam, H like Henry, or which stands for melanocyte stimulating hormone. Okay, melanocyte stimulating hormone. So when you look over here, this is it. This is our anterior pituitary gland, and this is our posterior pituitary gland. So again, this tiny little pea-sized structure secretes so many hormones. And again, without this, we would fall sick, and our ability to survive would not be very long. So it's a very important gland, endocrine gland. And again, this is the infundibulum that you see over here that's connecting the pituitary gland to the area superior to the gland, which is the hypothalamus. And again, superior to the hypothalamus would be the thalamus, right? So we have thalamus over here, hypothalamus over here, and then pituitary gland right over there. And this is that hypophyseal fossa that it's being protected in. Again, structures that are very important are heavily protected, and the pituitary gland is no exception to that. It is also very important structure of the brain. When I say, yeah, component, I should say, of the brain. So that was all about this part. Now let's go to the area behind it. We'll talk about the posterior lobe, the posterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is also called the neurohypophysis. Neurohypophysis. Now, it doesn't synthesize hormones, all right? It stores hormones instead. It stores and releases two hormones, which are oxytocin and ADH, or antidiuretic hormone, or another term for it is vasopressin. So, as I said before, it's made up of cells called pituocytes, okay? Pituocytes and axon terminals from the axon terminals of the hypothalamic neurosecretory cells. So the cell bodies of these neurosecretory cells are within the paraventricular and the supraoptic nuclei of the hypothalamus. And their axons, they end up forming the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tract. Okay, so the hypothalamo-hypophyseal tracts are the axons of the paraventricular and supraoptic nuclei, right? Cells. So again, it starts they start in the hypothalamus, and it ends near the blood capillaries in the posterior pituitary glands. So different neurosecretory cells produce the two different hormones. Again, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. So during and after delivery of a baby, oxytocin has two target tissues, uterus and breast. During delivery, stretching of the cervix of that uterus stimulates the release of oxytocin. Oxytocin then, it enhances the contraction of the smooth muscle cells in the wall of the uterus. Right? And this is what causes the contractions to become harder and harder and harder. This is all positive feedback. Okay? It works on the concept of positive feedback. Every subsequent contraction becomes harder and harder. Why? Because more and more oxytocin gets released until the baby is delivered. That's when it gets cut off. Now, after delivery, the oxytocin, it stimulates the ejection or letdown of milk from the mammary glands, so you can a woman could breastfeed the child. And again, this is stimulated by the child actually suckling on the breast. Now, So this is the effect in women. The function of oxytocin in males, and again, in non-pregnant females, in women, it's not very clear. However, with that said, it has a couple of functions. First of all, this is what you would say to be the love hormone, all right? So again, when you fall in love with your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your partner, the thing that, you think you love them, or that feeling of euphoria that you get, that you perceive as love, is stimulated by this hormone, this oxytocin. Again, also, during and after intercourse, sexual intercourse, the pleasure that we perceive, it's also believed to be that from oxytocin. And again, the love that a woman feels after birth for that child also is it's heightened by this hormone, okay, oxytocin. Again, if you think about it, you go through so much pain, and when you go through all that pain, but you feel love for that child, that is due to this hormone again. So it's very important. It plays a critical role. Now, antidiuretic hormone, on the other hand, antidiuretic hormone, this is a substance that decreases urine production. Antidiuretic, again, so when you look at it, diuresis is what? Diuresis is it's letting out water, okay, or sweating, or again, urinating, or producing urine. So there's another term for that, but anti is going to be against. So antidiuretic hormone, it decreases urine production. In other words, it's conserving water within the body. So antidiuretic hormone causes the kidneys to return more water back to the blood. So again, what ends up happening is the urine volume decreases, however, the concentration will likely increase. Now, in the absence of antidiuretic hormone, urine output will increase more than 10-fold. So again, from the average person, if you're drinking enough water, will produce about 1 to 2 liters of urine per day. In the absence of that, it could go all the way up to 20 liters. In the absence of antidiuretic hormone, this figure could go all the way up to 20 liters. Now, the pineal gland is a small endocrine gland that is attached to the roof of the third ventricle of the brain at the midline. Now, part of the epithalamus, it's positioned between the two superior colliculi, and again, it weighs roughly anywhere from 0.1 to 0.2 grams. The pineal gland is made up of masses of neuroglia and secretory cells called pinealocytes. Pinealocytes, Pinealocytes. They end up being covered by a capsule that's formed by the pia mater. Now, sympathetic postganglionic fibers from the superior cervical ganglia, they terminate within the pineal glands. Now, one hormone that's secreted by the pineal gland is melatonin. Okay, melatonin contributes to the setting of our body's biological clock. Okay, and this is controlled from the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus. Right, melatonin. Melatonin is pineal gland again. So when you feel sleepy, that's melatonin increasing in production. So what ends up happening is at nighttime, when there's less light, the decrease of the removal of white light, blue light, it increases or stimulates the production of melatonin. This is why we feel more sleepy at night. And again, when they're telling you don't look at screens at nighttime, this is the reason why. You're not going to be able to fall asleep because of the white light and the blue light that's coming from the cell phones. And that will inhibit the production of melatonin. Along with that, there's also this, that's SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. So this is a type of depression that it affects it affects many people, a lot of people, during the winter time, during the winter season, during the winter months. And again, this is when the day, the length of the day is short, not too much sun, it's cloudy. Again, we don't get enough sunlight, so what ends up happening? Our body produces more melatonin. We feel more sluggish, tired, sleepy. So again, it's what that actually is it's overproduction of melatonin. So again, it's easily treatable. SAD, full spectrum bright light therapy. It ends up, treating that. So that's how it is. And nowadays, I think Philips, they sell this portable machine. It's smaller than your phone, or about the size of your phone. That again, you sit in front of, and it helps do that. It delivers this light, this full spectrum light. Same thing with jet lag. You're tired, you're sleepy, you can't do that. Well, one easy way to get over jet lag naturally, 3 to 6 hours of exposure to bright light. Okay, it'll end up speeding up jet lag recovery. Hormones that are produced well, let's go over here to the next slide. All right. So, all right. Microscopic spherical cells called thyroid follicles make up most of the thyroid gland. The wall of each follicle is made up primarily of cells that are called follicular cells. Okay, follicular cells. Follicular cells extend to the lumen of the follicle. When the follicular cells are inactive, their shape is low cuboidal to squamous. This, again, what are we telling you? This is epithelial tissue. However, when it's influenced by thyroid stimulating hormone, they become cuboidal or columnar, low columnar in shape. And they, at that point, they actively start to secrete hormones. Now, the follicular cells, they produce two hormones, thyroxine, okay, thyroxine, which is also called tetraidothyronine, or T4. Okay. Why? Because it contains 4 atoms of iodine. That's why they call it tetra. Tetra means 4. Tetraidothyronine. And it also produces T3, or triiodothyronine. And again, it contains 3 atoms of iodine. Both T4 and T3 collectively are referred to as the thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones, they regulate oxygen use and our BMR, or basal metabolic rate. Okay, so oxygen use and basal metabolic rate are regulated by T3 and T4. In addition to that, cellular metabolism is also regulated by T3, T4. And in addition to that, third thing, growth and development also is regulated by T3 and T4. Another type of cell called parafollicular cells, or C cells, C like cat, parafollicular cells or C cells, they may also be embedded within a follicle, or sometimes they lie between the follicles. They produce the hormone calcitonin. Calcitonin helps regulate calcium homeostasis. Okay? Calcitonin decreases blood calcium levels by inhibiting osteoclast activity, okay, or by decreasing resorption of calcium in the kidneys. Okay, so calcitonin decreases calcium levels. Right, it's very important to know. Calcitonin decreases. So again, what are we looking at? We're looking at this gland here. This is your thyroid gland over here, right? And posterior to that, we're going to have those four little P-shaped structures. So again, if we look over here, this is an actual photograph of the thyroid gland. And let's see. So over here, you can see again, this is just the thyroid gland. This is your trachea where it's found. Superior to that, we have the cricoid cartilages over here. This is where you'd apply pressure if you're intubating somebody, by the way. Okay, so when we say, applying cricoid pressure to open up, to help lift the epiglottis, this is where it's being done. All right, so behind the thyroid gland, we have these 1, 2, 3, 4 glands. Okay, these are called the parathyroid glands. Parathyroid glands. So let's talk about these parathyroid glands. All right, so parathyroid glands produce a hormone called parathyroid hormone, or another term for it is parathormone. And it has the opposite effect of calcitonin. Parathyroid hormone or parathormone will increase or elevate calcium levels. Okay, so it increases osteoclast activity. Okay, in addition to even magnesium levels. How does it do that? Remember, osteoclasts, if you remember what osteoclasts do, osteoclasts, they break down bone tissue. All right, so or in other words, they increase bone resorption. What else do they do? All right, so microscopically, the parathyroid glands, they're made up of two kinds of epithelial cells. The more numerous of the two kinds of cells are the principal cells or the chief cells. Okay, chief, C-H-I-E-F, chief cells or principal cells, and they produce the parathyroid hormones. Now, the other type of parathyroid epithelial cell is called oxyphil cell. Oxyphil, O-X-Y-P-H-I-L, O-X-I-P-H-I-P-H-I-L, oxyphil cell. They don't really know what it does. It's unknown its function. However, when you're looking at it microscopically, it stains differently, so it kind of helps differentiate it helps differentiate between the two types of cells. In other words, because they stain and the other ones don't stain, we can say, oh, okay, these are the principal cells, so these are the chief cells, and these are the oxyphil cells. All right, let's move along. We looked at that, we looked at this. Here you see 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the parathyroid glands. Next, we move on to the adrenal glands. Now, the adrenal glands, all right, so the adrenal cortex ends up being subdivided into 3 zones, right? And each zone secretes different hormones. Now, the outer zone, first, let's step back 1 second. This is it. These are our kidneys. Found superior to the kidneys are these adrenal glands over here, okay, here and here. And you can see it's kind of like a pyramid. It's almost triangular in nature, all right, in its structure. So what we're saying is that this adrenal cortex, okay, it's divided into 3 zones, three layers, and again, they secrete different hormones. The outer zone, which is found just deep to the connective tissue capsule, is called the zona glandular losa. Okay, zona glandular losa. Its cells, they're arranged in clusters, spherical clusters and arched columns, and they secrete the hormone called mineralocorticoids. Okay? Why are they called mineralocorticoids? Because they affect the metabolism of the minerals sodium and potassium. Okay? Mineralocorticoids. Aldosterone, therefore, is a mineralocorticoid. Okay? Aldosterone is a mineralocorticoid. And aldosterone, therefore, is secreted by the zona glomerulosa. Yeah, zona glomerulosa. Now, moving along to the middle zone. The middle zone is called the zona fasciculate. Sorry, zona fasciculate. It's spelled Fasciculate. Okay, Fasciculate. Zona fasciculate. This is the widest of the three zones, and it's made up of cells that are arranged in long, straight columns. The cells that we find over here, they secrete the hormone, or they secrete glucocorticoids. Okay, and the main hormone that they secrete, or the main glucocorticoid that they secrete, is called cortisol. Cortisol, cortisol. Why are they called glucocorticoids? Well, glucocorticoids are named because they affect glucose metabolism. Okay? The cells of the inner zone are called the zona reticularis, and they're arranged in branching cords as well. Branched, okay, whereas the other ones in the zona fascicularis, they were straight up and down, straight columns. These are more branched. And they synthesize not too much, so they make a little bit of androgens. Okay, and these are weak androgens, not even strong. And androgens, they have masculating effects, masculizing effects. All right, so zona reticularis, it produces androgens. Zona fasciculate produces glucocorticoids, and the zona glomerulosa produces aldosterone, which is a mineralocorticoid. Now, when we go to the medulla, the adrenal medulla, okay, now this is the innermost part. So again, the inner part or the inner region of the adrenal gland is called the adrenal medulla. It's a modified sympathetic ganglion of the autonomic nervous system. It develops from the same embryonic tissue as all the other sympathetic ganglia, but it lacks cells. Its cells, they don't have axons. Instead, they form clusters around blood vessels. Now, rather than releasing a neurotransmitter, the cells of the adrenal medulla, they secrete hormones instead. And the hormone-producing cells are called chromaffin cells. Chromaffin cells. CHROMAFFIN. CHROMAFFIN. Chromaffin cells. Chroma means color. Affin means loving, or an affinity for that. And again, they get innervated by sympathetic preganglionic neurons from the greater splanchnic nerves of the thoracic spinal level, at the thoracic spinal level. Okay. All right, and what do they produce? These chromaffin cells, they produce epinephrine and norepinephrine. And again, we talked about epinephrine, norepinephrine, and you guys know the effects of it. that it has effects of what? Fight, the flight part, okay? The fight and flight part. So again, it's all during times of stress, for example, they get released. Yeah. All right, let's move along. Next, we move on to the pancreas. Now, for the pancreas, all right, here we go. This is our pancreas over here. You can see the kidneys over here. And this is part of our intestine over here. And the stomach would be found up over here. So again, it's located close to the stomach. These are some of the cells of the pancreas that you see over here. And you can see that the pancreas is highly vascular, okay? See all these little blood vessels over here. And there's a couple of different types, handful of different types of cells that you see over here. So you have alpha cells, these are the delta cells. You have the most predominant type are the beta cells. And then amongst them, we have these alpha cells, which are in purple. Okay, so alpha cells, beta cells, and delta cells. In addition to that, you have some of these odd-looking cells over here, which are called the F cells. So alpha cells, A stands for alpha. Alpha cells, well, let's go back over here. All right, so all right, so when you look over here, these are what's called the islets of Langerhans, okay, the islets of Langerhans. And within the islets of Langerhans, all right, so we find these different types of cells, okay? Within the pancreas, you have these areas, these clusters of cells that form these, kind of looks like an island, so they're called islets of Langerhans. Now within these islets of Langerhans, we have these types of cells. So alpha cells, again, alpha cell is a type of cell that we have found within the pancreatic islets, the pancreatic islets of Langerhans, which secrete the hormone glucagon. Okay, glucagon. Okay, so that's the alpha cells. Glucagon. It could also be called A cell. Okay, and it makes up roughly about 15% of the pancreatic islets. Okay, again. What is it secreting? Glucagon. Glucagon, glucagon. Beta cells, on the other hand, beta cells, they make up about 80% of the pancreatic islet cells. And they secrete insulin. Okay? Beta cells secrete insulin. Next, we have the D cells, okay, or the delta cells. Delta cells make up about 5% of the pancreatic islet. And they secrete somatostatin, okay? Somatostatin, somatostatin, somatostatin. Somatostatin is identical to growth hormone. I'm sorry, not growth hormone. Somatostatin is identical to the growth hormone inhibiting hormone that's secreted by the hypothalamus. And then there's also the F cells, okay? F cells, they make up whatever is left, whatever is left of the pancreatic islets. And they secrete pancreatic polypeptides, So we looked at that. So again, of these, they're all very important, right? You need to have them all to function properly. But if you think about it, the two that, for example, if you're in nursing and nutrition or dietetics for that matter, people that have diabetes, right? People that have diabetes, they have a problem of which type of cell? Well, the answer for that is the beta cells, okay? Depending on if you have type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, a couple of things. Type 1 diabetes, these beta cells, they're not functioning very well. They're not able to produce enough insulin for whatever reason. And again, this is due to you're born with it, right? They're defective, unfortunately. In type 2 diabetes, again, your body just becomes, it's not necessarily that your body is not producing enough, these beta cells are not producing enough insulin. That may be part of it, But again, what ends up happening is your body has become too sensitive to it, to the insulin. Why? Because you're eating so much sugar and sweets and other junk food. All right, moving on to ovaries and testes. Now, estrogen and progesterone, right? So together with gonadotropic hormones of the anterior pituitary, they regulate the female reproductive cycle. They maintain pregnancy. They prepare the mammary gland, the breast glands, the mammary glands for producing milk, or the term that we use is lactation. In addition to that, they promote the development and the maintenance of the secondary sex characteristics in females. Okay, this is both estrogen and progesterone. Let's talk about okay. Next one we have is inhibin. Inhibin, inhibits the secretion of follicle-stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Right. Relaxin increases the flexibility of pubic symphysis during pregnancy, and also helps dilate the uterine cervix during labor and delivery. The last one here, testosterone, it stimulates the descent of the testis before birth, right? It also regulates the production of sperm, and it promotes the development and the maintenance of the secondary sex characteristics of males, okay, in men. This is what makes men more muscular, a male more muscular, so it deepens the voice. It stimulates the production of axillary and pubic hair. So that's this increased production of TSH. And again, similarly, in females, it would be estrogen and progesterone that do that. Okay. All right, let's look at some other endocrine tissue of the GI tract, of the gastrointestinal tract. Gastrin. Gastrin promotes the secretion of gastric juice, and it also increases the movement of the stomach. Okay, that's gastrin. Then there's GIP, or glucose-dependent insulinotropic peptide. It stimulates the release of insulin by the pancreatic beta cells. Okay? It stimulates the release of insulin by pancreatic beta cells. So again, if there's, depending on what you eat, and as that the content of what you ate moves through the intestines, and there's a lot of carbs that are there, glucose that's there, and again, you want to absorb that, then GIP, the GI tract would stimulate the production of GIP. GIP would go target the beta cells, and then beta cells would start to produce more insulin. There's also secretin. Secretin stimulates the secretion of pancreatic juice and bile. Okay, both are needed for digestion to take place. Again, all these have a role in digestion, which is why it's found in the GI tract. And again, the stretching of the walls and the contents of the GI tract will stimulate these hormones. There's also CCK, or cholecystokinin. CCK stimulates the secretion of pancreatic juice. It regulates the release of bile from the gallbladder, and it also, this is very important now, it brings about a feeling of satiety, okay, or fullness after you eat. It takes a little time for it to get secreted. It takes minutes, which is why they tell you to eat slowly and not eat fast. So when you eat slow, you're giving your body time to secrete CCK, and then force that CCK to go to your brain to give you that feeling of satiety, of fullness. One of the tricks now, if you want to eat less, is before you decide to sit down and have your dinner or lunch, or even breakfast for that matter, one of the things that you can do is have about 4 pieces of walnuts. Okay, walnuts, or in Turkish it's called ceviz. Ceviz. When you eat that, walnuts has the ability to significantly secrete CCK. Eat this about 20 minutes before you have your breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and you're going to feel full. you're probably not going to eat as much, because you're going to have that feeling of satiety. Your body's going to start producing the CCK, and that's going to go to your brain. So by the time you sit down, especially if you have a tendency to overeat, then that will not be, hopefully it won't be heightened. It'll be less. All right, other endocrine tissues. Moving on to the placenta. Human chorionic gonadotropin. Human chorionic gonadotropin. It stimulates the corpus luteum in the ovary to continue the production of estrogen and progesterone in order to maintain pregnancy. Okay, it's very important. It maintains, again, so it maintains pregnancy, and it also helps prepare the mammary glands to secrete milk. Next, we have the kidneys. Okay, we move on to the kidneys. All right, so the kidneys, the renin-angiotensinogen. You guys will learn about that in physiology. All right, so it's a part of a sequence of reactions that raises blood pressure. Okay, and the result is, how does it raise blood pressure? Well, renin essentially, it causes vasoconstriction, makes your blood vessels smaller, the capillaries smaller. In addition to that, also it'll secrete aldosterone as well. Okay, so again, when you're conserving fluid, and in other words, the volume goes up and blood vessels get smaller, pressure will rise. Okay, so remember, aldosterone, what does aldosterone do? Aldosterone is a antidiuretic. Okay, it conserves water. So the more water you have, and the smaller the area that's holding that water, the pressure will rise. The other thing the kidney produces is a hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO. EPO, again, when there's not enough oxygen, if you're not getting enough oxygen in your body, then the kidneys secrete this hormone EPO. EPO goes to the bone marrow, and where it secretes, increases the rate of red blood cell formation. The last one we see over here is calcitrol. Calcitrol aids in the absorption of dietary calcium and phosphorus. Okay? Calcium and phosphorus. Next, we move on to atrial natriuretic peptide, or ANP. Atrial natriuretic peptide, ANP. These are peptide hormones. They're produced by the atria of the heart in response to stretching. Okay? So ANP will inhibit aldosterone production. When aldosterone production is inhibited, what happens to pressure? Blood pressure will decrease. Okay. So if aldosterone production is decreased, we start urinating more. Okay, we start urinating more, we start losing more sodium. So again, net result is what? Net result is lower blood pressure. Then we have the last one here that we find in fat, okay, or in adipose tissue, which is leptin. Leptin suppresses appetite, and it also increases FSH and LH activity. All right, so that's the end of this unit, chapter 22, on the endocrine system.